What's up guys, this is the DevForce channel and welcome to our first video, the MFC Elimu web series. I'm Ansel Munshura, I'm a software developer and I'll be your instructor for today. And so the reason why we decided to do this web series is that a lot of people have reached out to me asking what they need to do or to learn to grow into a professional developer or programmer and how to go about it. And yes, I understand programming in general can be very overwhelming because there seem to be a lot to learn, and the learning curve seems to be very steep. On the contrary, I'm hoping by the end of this video, I'm able to calm your nerves and help you set a clear learning path and guideline to help you advance from a beginner to be the professional developer or programmer you want to be. So on that note, the DevForce, we've started this web series for web development. It's going to be web development for now. We are hoping in future, God willing, we'll also dive into other roles as we'll see later on. So we are going to provide you with video tutorials and courses on what you need to learn, especially the programming languages, with examples of real life projects to help you know how to approach such kind of work or projects. So that means that we'll be uploading these videos for you in the order that we are going to go through in this session. And don't forget to hit the subscribe button below to stay up to date on when this video will be out. So with that said, let's get right into it. So you can see first I have these slides here that we're going to go through. And first of all, the expectation for this session is just to help you, to give you the knowledge of the kind of tools and languages you need to learn. So I'm not going to press any kind of tool or language on you. That's up to your choice, but I'm going to give you sort of knowledge on what most people use or what languages are mostly used in each section. So you can see down there I've written, this is not a one size fits all. I'm just hoping I'm able to give you options to choose from, and also to help you know which are the most common tools that are used and which are the most common languages that are used for website development. So first of all, I just want to describe for you these roles. These are the roles in, I can say, software development in general. And you can see the first three I have highlighted because those are the three major roles we are going to focus on in this video. The others, like the database developer, the mobile developer, those two we are going to touch briefly towards the end. But the rest, I think, hopefully in the upcoming videos, we'll be able to go through each role so that you also know the kind of duty and expectations for these roles. We have the blockchain specialist, we have cloud engineer, data scientist, DevOps, machine learning, and penetration tester. So I'm going to do another video separately so that we go through these roles to help you understand the duties and the expectations for each role. And for this video, we are going to focus on the first three roles: the front end, the back end, and the full stack. So let's get into it. So in web development, I'm going to explain to you these terminologies because you're going to come across them as you continue to grow and as you continue to learn website development. So the first is just websites, and websites are just basically files stored on a web server, and these files can now be accessed publicly through what we call the Wild Wide Web. The Wild Wide Web is the www, which is just a collection of websites and web pages stored on a web server. So the website could be on that public web space, or it could be on your local machine. Both of them are still just websites. And the next is what I've just said, the servers, and this is what hosts your website on that web space. That's what we call the server, because it consists of sort of tools that helps your browser to get access to this website or this website files. And then the next is just the browser. The browser is just the program on your machine or on your computer that helps you load the website. And normally your machine is normally referred to as the client. And so whenever we'll be going through the front end, maybe you'll hear the terminology client. The client just means it's the machine you use to access the website through the browser. And I think it's the fourth one. The fourth one, we have the internet protocol. So the internet protocol is just sort of the rules that determine how interaction is done on the website, how the website are accessed, because there need to be a set of rules. The browser and the server needs to agree on how they're going to communicate in order to relay this kind of information back and forth. And so we have the term, the IP address. The IP address is what uniquely identifies the website on the internet. So normally, for example, when you want to search a website, for us, we don't type this. You can type the specific IP, and you're able to access that particular website. And that is if the IP it's not a shared storage space. But normally we type the URL of the website. It will be mediaforce or mfc.ke. That's the URL. The domain, that's the domain name. So we access this website using that domain name. And the domain name is just what helps the user understand, because we are not going to type the IP directly. So the domain name helps us to get access to this website through the IP address. The last one is the Hypertext Transfer Protocol, the HTTP. And this is what connects you and your website to the remote server where all the website data can be found. So with that said, these terminologies, we're going to come across them as we go on through this session. So we can just move on to the next one. And this is just a brief introduction. We had looked at the three main roles in web development, and that is the front end, the back end, and the full stack. So the front end is just, the front end role just involves the person who is responsible for coming up with the interface or what the user is able to see. So his duty is to design and to come up with a good interface to help the user access and get the information they're looking for through that particular website. And you can see the programming languages used front end, the HTML, we have the DOM, which is just short for document object model. We have the CSS, we have the Sass, JavaScript, HTTP. So these are just the tools that are used that you need to know for you to be a front-end developer. And we are going to look at them in detail later on. The next one is the backend. The backend focuses on the behind the scenes, what you are not able to see, the logic behind that particular web application. That's the role of the backend developer, to help write or come up with code that helps you get access to the data that is stored somewhere on the database. So the duty is to ensure that this data is accessible and can be relayed to the front end for the users to see. And we have languages like PHP, we have Python, JavaScript, C#, Java, and then we also have the database languages like the MySQL, the Mongodb, we have the SQL server, we have NoSQL, which is just basically is not a structured database. That's the NoSQL. Then lastly, we have the full stack web development. Full stack just means you need to be conversant with both the front end and the back end development. And that means for you to be a full stack developer, you need to first learn the front end skills and also the back end. So with both, you're able to harmonize both and you're able to build a full application, both from front end to back end and to the database. And yeah, those are the three major roles we are going to look at. So we are going to dive into them one by one, and we are going to start with the front-end web development. So in the front-end web development, we've said this is also referred to as the client side. And this is the side of the website or the software that the user is able to see and the user is able to interact with. And so the front end, it allows users to interact with the website. It could be playing video games, it could be opening an image, highlighting a text, or entering data into a form. That is all front end, and that's the duty of the front end developer to design and develop these elements to help the user interact with the website. So his duty is to create the visual aspects. So for you to be a good front-end developer, you need to have a good eye for design, and that includes how you lay out your data or how the user is able to navigate it, the aesthetics and the graphics and the colors and the branding. All that are some of the key qualities that a front-end developer need to know. And we already saw the languages here: HTML, CSS, Sass, and JavaScript. Those are the three major languages: the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. And we are going to look at them one by one so that you know also what they are all about. So for you to, I think in general, for you to be a developer, you need to start with these basic front-end skills: the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Once you master how to work with these languages, then I think you're able to come up or develop any website, because the rest of the tools that we're going to look at, or the languages, are just things we call frameworks. And yeah, they are frameworks. Frameworks are just what is built on these three main languages. So once for you to know a given framework for a particular language, it could be a framework for CSS like Bootstrap or Tailwind, or Material UI. So you need to be conversant with CSS. You need to learn how to work with CSS first before you can move to the frameworks. And that is what we are going to look at. We are going to look at each languages in detail, just to give you a picture or an understanding of what they're all about. So first, let's look at the HTML and the CSS. There's been a debate on whether these two are actually programming languages, but either way, you need to know, or you need to learn how to work with both of them. And the HTML stands for Hypertext Markup Language, and this is like the bare minimum. This is like the web development 101. For you to be a web developer, you need to know how to work with HTML. And HTML just gives us a structure of information of the web page, the basic structure of how to lay out your information. And each web page, the HTML helps us define the elements on the web page. It could be a text, it could be an image, it could be a video, it could be a form. So the HTML provides us with elements which are always referred to as tags, sort of to lay out the structure of information on a web page. And so the HTML elements helps us specify what kind of information each item on the web page is going to have. And the CSS is now what is used for design, like, because just HTML alone won't give you good aesthetics. You need another language like CSS to help you sort of give it a good visual design and to help you build a really appealing and attractive website. So that's the work of the CSS, to add layout, to add design and good look, to make it presentable to the users. And it helps transform and improve the appearance of a website to match sort of what you envisioned that website to look like. And just to give you a picture of how this is how the HTML and the CSS files look like. So on the left we have the HTML, and on the right we have the CSS. So on the left you can see we have what we call tags. Tags is where we have the opening and closing brackets, and each tag, most of the tags you can see they have the opening and the closing. And you can, from this example I've just given you the basic structure of a HTML web page. At the top there you can see you specify the doc type HTML, and then you begin with the HTML tag. So you can see at the top, once you begin the HTML tag, at the bottom you have to close it. The next, the head, once you begin the head tag, you have to close it. Though there are those tags that do not have the closing tags, and I think those one will look at them deeply when we come to the video where we'll now be looking at them in detail. And so you can see inside the head just contains the information about your web page. It could be the links to other external web pages, it could be the title, the description of your page, the metadata, the keywords and stuff like that. That's what is contained on the head, and also the title for your web page. You can see there's the title tag there. So for example, now this document, the title for this file will be document, and then once you have included all the information about your page, you just close it with a closing tag. The closing tag have the slash before the name of the tag. So once you have the opening tag, then you can also close it once you have included everything within the tag. Then in the body is now what you are able to see on a web page. So the body, we have these different tags. You can see I have the H1 tag, the H2, we have the P, we have the EM, the UL, LI. So these are the tags, and it helps, these tags helps us specify which kind of element you have for that tag. An example, the H1 just means it's the heading one, which is always the heading text with the largest font size, the H1. And as you go down to H2, H3, H4, the size of the title reduces. So you can use either the one that gives you the right kind of size. Then you have the P tag for paragraph. We have the UL tag for an ordered list. An ordered list just means it's not numbered, so by default it's always bulleted. And then we have the OL, which is the ordered list, which will help you give the kind of numbering or order you want. Then we have the input. The input tag is just the tag for used with forms. like when the user want to enter some data into a form, then this is the tag that you use to help the user enter data. And you can see the type here is button. So this is an input button for the form. The type could be an email, it could be a text, it could be phone numbers, it could be what's the name? It could be a checkbox. All those tags, all those type are what are included in the input tag. And so on the right, we have the CSS, what helps us give this web page a good design. So on the left, on the HTML, just inside the head tag, there's a tag for the link, the style sheet link. And this is where you link the CSS, the external files. So you can see here the external file is named styles.css. So this is where the layout of the CSS file is. So whatever changes you make on that particular file is going to affect this page in terms of the look and the design. So in the CSS on the right, we have the body. So this, everything specified within the body is going to affect the body tag. If it's the anchor tag, which is A, it's going to affect the anchor tags. If it's the paragraph, it's going to affect the paragraphs. So inside the CSS, you can see you're able to specify the margin, which is just the space outside of the element, the padding, the space within or inside the element, the font weight, the font size, the height, the width, the text alignment, whether left, right, or center, the background color, the font family, the kind of font you want to use, the overflow, the x-axis and the y-axis, whether you want your content to sort of move to the next line or the content that exceeds the limit to be hidden, you're able to specify that. So this is how the CSS looks like, and this is how the HTML also looks like. And just to know what you need to learn about the HTML and CSS, first you need to know the structure of the HTML web page, which is also referred to as the DOM. And you need to know how to use these tags to specify the kind of element you want to put up on your page. And I've given examples here of elements like the anchor tag, which is used for links. We have the P for paragraphs, the IMG for images, the div for a given section. You have the span, you have the heading tag, and the etc. And each of these tags is also able to accommodate attributes. Like the anchor tag, you need to specify the link. So that's why we have the href. We have the image, you need to specify from which location in your directory is the image coming from. So you need to specify that in the source. Then the ALT, which is just the alternative, helps you describe the image, the kind of image, so that someone is able to know what the image is all about. Or when the image is not loaded, then we are able to identify what the image is through the alt attribute. The type is used mostly for input links, not input links, but input the forms. If you want to specify the kind of form input, whether text or email or telephone or website, all that, you're able to specify that with the type. In CSS, you need to learn the CSS attributes, the colors, the margin, the padding, the font size, and how to use them. The units, we have animations, we have transformations. It could be like if you want to scale a given element, you need to learn all that. And you also, another key thing you need to learn is the units, because when you're going to specify the size of the font, you need to specify also the units. And there are three kinds of units that are normally used: the pixels, the rem, and the em. And specify all of them work almost they work the same way. So it's a choice of reference, and we are going to look at the units in details in a later video to help you know which is the best unit to use for the CSS when you are specifying your CSS. Then also you need to learn about positioning, because if you're going to lay out your content on the page, there's a special way if you want to position your elements, whether depending on the size of the page or the origin of the page, or whether you want to position it relative to another element, or you just want it to be fixed on the page. So whether you scroll, the element will still appear in the same position, or if you want to make it sticky. And then also you need to learn about alignment. In alignment, there are specifically three major ways of how to align your content. It could be in terms of block, where each element covers the whole width. It could be inline, where it's side by side. You can use the flex box and the grid. These two are majorly used to lay out content side by side, and also to align them whether center or at the end or in the middle or at the top or in the middle. You use the flex box and the CSS grid. There's also the tables. You can also use the tables to help you align your content. If you want to align the content side by side and you don't want to use the flex box or the CSS grid, then you're able to use the tables. Then you also need to learn about the transitions and the animations. And this is just that special effect when a page is loaded, how the elements appear or show up on your screen. So you need to learn how to give them animation and transition, sort of to give it that good effect when they're appearing on the page. And then lastly, you need to know about responsiveness, because the website is going to be accessed by different kinds of users. They could be using their laptop or their PC or their phone. So you need to make your website also align or to appear for it to appear the same, or to appear the appearance to be well on both the phone, the tablet, or the laptop or the machine. So there we use the media queries to help you with that. Yeah, and next I think we can look at the CSS, because we have looked at the CSS, the cascading style sheets. Now let's have a look at some of the frameworks for the CSS. And frameworks, these are just pre-made CSS style sheets that helps you to work a bit faster. So that an example would be, if you want to align your content side by side, then it means you have to write a lot of flex CSS code. And so to help you save time, you're able to use these frameworks now by just calling the class for that kind of alignment. It could be a center alignment, you want to align it center, or if you want to divide your page into columns, then you just call the class for that particular column, and it will help you just lay it out a bit faster rather than just to write each of them on your own. So one of the reasons why you should use frameworks, not just even for CSS, but even for other languages, is to speed up your development, because that is a major plus if you're able to build your application a bit faster and give you easy time. Then the CSS frameworks will help you with that. It also helps you to maintain a clean layout, so that you don't have everything cluttered, or you lose track of your code while you're writing the CSS, because the code will be too much for you. So it helps you just have a clean and maintainable layout, because just by calling the classes, you have one link or one file from which all your CSS styles are being called from. And thirdly, it enables mobile responsiveness. I think that's one major advantage, is mobile responsiveness and cross-browser functionality. So instead of writing your own media queries, well, at some point you'll find that you'll be writing your own, but most of the elements on your page are already mobile optimized. So just by calling their classes or using the classes on the style sheets, then most of your code or most of your elements will be already mobile responsive, and that is also another plus. And also it just helps you to enforce good web design principles. Instead of having too much code until you lose track, because at some point when I was learning this CSS language, then at some point when you're working with big projects, then you find that the CSS is too much, and at some point you are starting to lose track of your code. These frameworks will be of great help to you, to help you sort of speed it up and to have a clean, maintainable layout and a good design for your website without having to struggle too much writing each CSS code. And below here, I've given you some of the examples of the popular CSS frameworks. We have the Bootstrap and the Tailwind. For me, I use Bootstrap and Tailwind mostly, but if you're able to, if the others are a bit faster, like the Material CSS, we have the UI kit, the Semantic UI, we have the Boolmar Foundation. If those are also able to work for you, then it's just a matter of your choice to choose that which suits you best. And yeah, I think that's it for the CSS frameworks. Now, before we go to the next one, before we go to JavaScript, I want to mention another thing, and there's something we called the Sass. Sass stands for Syntactically Awesome Style Sheets, and this is just a scripting language that helps you interpret your CSS. So the reason why people have started using it mostly, or the reason why I advise you to also learn Sass, is that it helps you avoid repeating most of your style sheets. It helps you save time and write the style sheets a bit faster, because if you're able to specify sort of like one constant variable, like if you want all your text to have a given font, then you're able to set that, and then when you'll be applying the elements, you just use that particular constant that you have set for all the texts. At some point, maybe you'd want to change the font for this text. If at all you are writing the sizes for individual elements, then it means you have to change for each element. But with the Sass, you are able to do various assigning of various values to variables or constants. You're able to do calculations on, depending on whether, depending on the size of the screen, you're able to calculate how the size of your element, like if you want the size of your element to be relative to the size of the device that the user is using, then you're able to do that with Sass. So I just thought maybe I should mention Sass, because it's also an important language, and probably it's not compulsory for you to learn it, but I just thought maybe I should give you this to help you improve or to work a bit faster while doing your style sheets. And I've given an example of the code. You can see we have declared a variable for the font and the primary color. So inside the element of body, you can see the color, we have set it to the primary, which is the color code, the 333, which I think it's the dark color. It's a shade of black. So all elements within the body are going to have this color, this primary color as the main color. So if at all I'm going to add another element, it could be a paragraph, and I want to add the color, then again I'll just call this primary color. If at all I specified them individually, then it means I'll have to be changing the color for each element within the style sheet. So that's just the advantage of Css. It helps you create style sheets a bit faster. Yeah. So yeah, with that said, I think let's move on to the next one, JavaScript. So for JavaScript, now that we've known that we have the HTML that helps us structure our data, then we have CSS, which helps us give it a good visual appeal. Now for JavaScript, it helps you add functionality to your website, especially anything that is moving on a website means that one was developed using JavaScript, and it helps us just to bring the website to give life to that website, so that you don't just have a static website or a website where there is no motion or there's no movement or there's no animation. Normally it's good practice to add this to give it sort of just that good visual, good aesthetics, or good appeal, visual appeal. So even though the HTML and the CSS gives you the good design, so we need JavaScript to help us add certain functionalities to our website. It could be when the user is interacting with the website, and probably the user submitted a form, you'll need to process or to validate that form, so that if an incorrect value is entered, like if the format of the email is not the right kind of format, then the user can be prompted to tell them that this is not the correct format and you need to write the correct format. So that's just one use case for JavaScript. And under JavaScript, these are the things you need to learn. You need to learn the basics of JavaScript, and that is how to define variables, how to use functions, conditional statements, how to use loops, arrays, and objects. And I think one of the standard that I advise you to learn is the ES6. This is like the basis for JavaScript, the modern JavaScript. You need to learn ES6. Right now, we have ES8 moving forward, but ES6 is sort of like the basis for you to learn JavaScript. So the next one is DOM manipulation, and we looked at DOM when we were looking at HTML, and the DOM are just the elements within the HTML. You need to know how to manipulate them. An example would be like, probably you want to change the color of, it could be a form. You want to change the color of a form. If the user enters the wrong kind of information, then you want to prompt them with the red color, which is normally used for errors. And you want to tell them that what you've entered is not correct. So you need to manipulate that particular input element to give it that shade of red. And you're able to do that using JavaScript by just identify this element and then changing its color. And that is what an example of the DOM manipulation, to help you style and select the HTML elements and to do whatever action you want to do on them. It could be animation, to give them animation. If you want to toggle to show or hide the elements, you are able to do that with JavaScript. And then thirdly is arrays. Arrays has become one of the most important thing to learn about JavaScript, because it comes in handy when you're dealing with the external data, or when you're storing data, or when you're calling data using the APIs. normally it helps you store your data and also helps you manipulate it. So you need to learn how to work with arrays, how to filter, like if you want to filter the list of data that you have in the array, or you want to loop through each particular data in the array, or if you want to know the length or to join two different arrays, then you need to learn how to work with arrays. So there is much to cover with arrays, and I think also this will look into detail when we come to the video where we'll be concentrating on JavaScript. Yeah, and the fourth one is the Json. Json also has become one of the key types of storing data, because with JSON you are able to store data, or to store your data sort of in an object like format. And JSON is mostly used when you're working with data, like when you're using an API to fetch data from maybe an external database or an external file maybe, then you need to get that data in form of JSON. And one major advantage of JSON is that it works literally with almost any kind of language. With any kind of language, you're able to transform data into JSON. So if you want to transform your data, probably if you are working with JavaScript and you want to transform that data to PHP, probably, then if you want to not to transform but to use that data in PHP, then you're able to use JSON, because JSON works with most of the languages, and it helps you with storing and fetching your data. And then we have the HTTP requests. These are just the kind of requests made to the server. The GET, which just simply means if you want to fetch a given web page with data, use the GET request. POST is when you're submitting a given request. It could be submitting a form, then use the POST. Delete, just from the name, if you want to delete a given kind of data from the database. And put mostly is used when you want to edit that data. And then lastly, we have the TypeScript. TypeScript is just a higher, what do you call it? It's just like a higher form of JavaScript with more features added onto it. So also, I think probably it's good practice, I can say, to also learn TypeScript once as you learn JavaScript, because TypeScript is based on JavaScript, so it will not be that hard for you to learn the TypeScript. Yeah, so I think for JavaScript, those are the major things you need to look at. And next, let us just look at some of the JavaScript frameworks, because once you've learned JavaScript, then the next step will be to learn the frameworks. And here I've just mentioned the three major frameworks for JavaScript, and that is the React.js, we have the Vue, and the Angular. So React was developed by Facebook, and it's a component-based framework. It helps you build fast, user-friendly, and reactive web applications. And Vue.js mostly is used to develop a scalable web application. Like if you're projecting, maybe the application will scale or will grow into a bigger web application, then probably Vue is the best. And also it's easy to learn. It's mostly used with later on when we look at the framework for PHP, which is Laravel. Vue.js is mostly used for the front-end development, for the front-end development for the web pages. So it's mostly used with the PHP, the Laravel. When you'll be learning Laravel, then you're also able to learn the Vue.js just for design. But if still you can use the basic HTML, CSS, JS for your front end, then it's still fine. But if you want to use the frameworks also, it will be a bit easier for you to get conversant with it. So I'll advise you to just try it out. The third one is the Angularjs. So the Angularjs, it uses this architecture, the MVC framework. MVC just means Model View Controller, and it's a particular kind of framework that is used in most applications to build this kind of web applications. The model, the view, and the controller. The view, from the name, is just the front end, what you can see. Then the model is how your data is, or information is structured. And then the controller is now what links the model and the view, sort of to help you present this data into the front end from the database. Yeah, that's just the model view. And Angular is mostly used with real-time web application. These applications where you want response or elements to be displayed instantly. It could be maybe a chat. If you're building a chat application, Angular would be a good fit for it. And then I've mentioned there are other JavaScript libraries like the jQuery, the Glimmer, the D3, mostly used for data. We have the anime. If you want to include animations to your web page, you can use the anime library to help you just build the animations a bit faster. There are several other libraries you can choose from, and I think that's up to you to, if you want to learn more about that, then you can always search that through the internet. So the choice of, I've written a note down there that the choice of framework you're going to use, now that one will be up to you. It could depend on probably a kind of job that you are looking for. They need someone who have good knowledge with React.js, then you need to learn React.js. It could be maybe you just want to learn a JavaScript framework a bit faster, and a framework that is easier to learn, then probably you will choose the Vue.js, or you just want to learn depending on the kind of demand that is out there, then that choice will be up to you. And so you can choose either frameworks depending on those statistics that I've given you. So as we conclude the front end, one last thing maybe worth mentioning is design, because front end is where you develop what the user is able to see. And so you need to know some of the design trends, the current design trends that you need to be familiar with. And I'll just give a brief description. We have, while designing, you're not designing for yourself, but you're designing for the people who are going to use this particular web application. So as you design any web application, you need to focus on the user. You need to imagine yourself also as a user, what the kind of interaction that you'd expect of a user on a given application. So if you're focusing on the user, then it means you have to be keen on performance, so that the user doesn't wait too long for your application to load, or too long for given elements to come up on the page. So you need to optimize on performance, optimize on the images. You need to support, it needs to support different browsers, because the users probably use different kinds of browsers when accessing anything on the web or on the internet. And also the responsiveness of the web page. It needs to support different kinds of devices, and I think that's the next thing, that you need to develop mobile first application. Mobile first just means that your priority is with the mobile users, that as much as you're building it on desktop, but it needs also to support the mobile users, also need to be able to access it, and the design needs to look good also on mobile. Then another trend is just minimalism, to avoid overcomplicating things or overdoing things or overdoing the design or the elements. So you need to avoid cluttering. It needs to be simple. It needs to be very minimal, very few elements, not overlapping each other, good spacing, and just focusing on those essentials of good design. And that is what you need to focus on, the minimalism. Then another thing is scrolling. Nowadays, most of the web applications have this smooth scrolling effect, and I think that's also important, to have that smooth scrolling effect, and also not to have a web page, a very long web page with a very long scroll. At times it can be frustrating to users when you build very long web pages. You just need to keep it simple, short. Just the front page need to have sort of the essentials, what you want to communicate to the user, for them to move into the rest of the pages or the rest of the web application. So scrolling effect is also important. Colors is also important. You need to choose the right kind of colors, and the colors normally always conform to the brand colors of the, could be a company or an organization that you're building the website for. So your web application must be in line with those brand colors, and they should not be shouting colors, or they should not strain the eyes of the user. So you also need to have a good eye for the colors. And then we have the parallax animation. Parallax just means that you have an image, a background image, and then you have a text or an element on top of it. So as you scroll, the image doesn't scroll at the same speed as the elements on top of it. That's what we call the parallax effect, and it's mostly used in web pages with these sections with background images. So you're able to use the parallax effects, also add a good visual appeal on your web page, and I'd also advise on using that for your design. Lastly, it's just the multimedia experience. That is bringing together, how you bring together the text, the video, if there are images, not images, but audio, the images, video, audio, the text, all that, how you're able to harmonize and bring them together to make a good, visually appealing website. So multimedia experiences is also important. It also helps to give that good visual appeal. Yeah, I think that's it for the design trend. So just to wrap up on what we've looked at for front end, if you want to be a front end developer, then this is the kind of roadmap probably you'll have. That is to start with the basics of front end, the HTML, CSS, and JavaScript. Then once you've learned how to use these languages, then you can practice by creating your own personal portfolio website, just to help you learn how to use the tools or the languages you've learned, the HTML, the CSS, the JavaScript, how to use them on probably a real application, and you can start with your personal portfolio to help you practice these skills that you've learned, or the languages that you've learned, the HTML, CSS, and JS. Then after that, probably you can move on now to learn a CSS framework or Sass. So the CSS framework will help you to improve on the design and to build your application a bit faster. Though, as I said, it's optional. That's a choice for you. It's up to you to decide whether you'd want to go with the frameworks or just want to stick with the original HTML, CSS, and JS. Though I'd advise you to learn at least one CSS framework, and I think the easiest one probably would be Tailwind or Bootstrap. For me, those are the ones that I'm conversant with. Then the next is to, once you've learned how to use the frameworks or the CSS frameworks, then learn how to create mobile responsive layout. Because once you've built the website on a desktop, then you need to optimize it also to be equally appealing on mobile phones. So you need to learn how to create mobile responsive layouts. Then after that, you can move on to the more technical bit on JavaScript, and that is using the libraries that we looked at. It could be the animation library, it could be a slider library, it could be the jQuery. Use those to sort of make the website a bit more dynamic and have more functionalities on your website. So that's what you need to improve on JavaScript. Then once you've been conversant with the JavaScript details or the technical bit of JavaScript, then it's just a matter of continuing to sharpen your skills on the CSS and JS, creating as more layouts as you can. And I think one of the best guideline I'll give you to help you practice on the design on front-end development. Normally, there are these websites with sort of layouts. They give you layouts of websites that they have designed, probably with a design tool. It could be Adobe XD or Figma, such kind of layouts. So you can just pick one of the layouts and try to develop it now using the front-end languages, the HTML, CSS, and JS, and also using some of the CSS frameworks and adding more functionalities to it, adding more effects to it. And that is a way you can, it can help you to learn, to continue learning more and more, and to also continue sharpening your skills on front end. So once you've been well conversant with the three, then now you can move on to a front-end framework. It could be React, it could be Vue.js, or it could be Angular. Now, before you even move to those, because they are JavaScript frameworks, then it means you really need to master the technical bit of JavaScript that we looked at, especially working with arrays and the HTTP API call, making API calls and stuff like that. So that's what you need to be well conversant with as you move on to learning the front-end frameworks. And then lastly is just to know how to deploy your application, because once you have developed your website, then it needs to be deployed. It needs to be made accessible now on the internet, and that's what we refer to as deployment. And even before I mention deployment, let me mention the last bit here is to learn how to push your project to an online repository. So as you continue developing, as you continue working on a project, then there's need for you to store every progress that you made. You need to push it to an online repository, and an example is Git, and we'll look at that into detail later on. But this helps you to track the progress you're making in the project. So if at all maybe you make a mistake, then you're able to roll back to the previous version, and it just helps you to make yourself organized, and also to keep track of the progress you're making on the project. So yeah, now let's move on to the tools. Now that we've looked at some of the front-end languages, let us look at some of the tools to help you as you continue working on projects or continue building front-end applications. There are tools that are very important for programming. And the first one is package managers. I don't know if I got that right. Is it the package managers? Yeah, the first one is the package manager. So for package managers, these are just a collection of tools that helps you automate how you install and configure the project you're working on, or the application you're working on. It helps you keep track of, probably if you're using external tools, or external, what do you call them? If you're using external packages, if you're using external packages, then you're able to track these are the kind of packages that you're using on this application, so that maybe if you are using an online repository and you are working on the project maybe on another machine, then you're able to identify that you're able to install this package. It helps you install these packages on this new machine, and you just continue working as you were before. And most of these packages are open. They're open source, meaning they are free to install in your project. And so, just like plugins, for those who are conversant with WordPress uses plugins where you're able to add functionality to your website using plugins. So that is this. It's similar to that. Packages, they're also sort of like plugins. They help you to add functionality to your website a bit faster without having to code these functionalities from scratch. And an example could be, the example I've given there is the slider, because a slider consists of an image and probably an icon for moving to the next slider, and also you may have text on your slider. So for you to bring all this up together, then you're able to use a package, for a slider package, where you just install it, and then now you just be using the code from the package. And so your duty is just to add the text and the images you want to put up on the slider. And you can see this makes it a bit faster as you develop your application. The two most common type of package managers used are, we have the NPM and the yarn. The NPM is the node package manager, and we have the yarn. And again, we'll also look at this in details in the upcoming videos. Yeah. And then the next kind of tools, we have the build tools. And these build tools, they just help you automate given tasks. A good example I would give is probably for mobile app developers. Like when you are developing a mobile app, once you have finished the development, then you see you need to sort of build this project or application into an installable software, the APK. You have to build it into an APK, and you are able to use a build tool to sort of help transform this project into an installable application. And that is the work of the build tools. It helps you process these files from the source code, from the code that you've written. So you're able to downgrade or to test the pages with much ease. And the most common web package that is used, the most common build tool used is the web package, and not the web package, but the webpack. It's used for bundling many web packages and dependencies, either images or the CSS file, and then it's able to create a module out of them before bundling them into sort of manageable output files. So that's how you use the build tools. We also have the Grunt. Grunt is mostly used with tasks when you want to automate given tasks for some of the processes that maybe you are not able to do because they are very but tiresome. And you're able to use a build tool like Grunt for that one. Yeah, that's it for the build tools. Let us look at now the version control. We mentioned pushing projects to online repository, and that is the work of these version control tools because it helps you, they help you track and manage the changes on your software code or on your application. So every time you update or make a change to your project, you're able to keep track on the kind of changes you made, and you're able to revert or go to a previous change in case you made a mistake. And the most popular version control or online repositories are the GitHub and the GitLab. And I think you can look into those. They help you also store your application online so that you're able to retrieve it from anywhere. And you're also able, helps you just maintain that continuity once you are done with the project and maybe you want to finish it later on. Then again, you are able to pull the changes that you have made and continue working on them. And then, yeah, I think that's all for the tools. So we can go to the backend. We can go to the backend tools. So as we mentioned, the backend developers are the people responsible for working with the servers, the database, everything that is behind the scenes to make data be presented to the user on the front end. So the backend, it just helps you handle the data and also add functionality on the front end. So maybe if a user want to fetch, probably if your user is fetching through a blog page, and now you want to present the different blogs from the database for the user. So it's the duty of the backend developer to develop functionality to lay out this information, these blogs to the user in the front end, and they develop things called APIs, sort of to call, to retrieve this data from the DB and present it to the front end. And so that is the work of the backend developer. So backend developers they work mostly with the servers and the database. We had looked at what both are. And so the database is responsible for storing, organizing and processing the data so that it's able to be accessed or retrieved by the server. And the server is responsible for sending, processing and receiving data requests from the front end. And so the intermediary between the database and the client is normally the servers to help get or fetch this information from the DB and present it to the user. So just as a footnote, normally when you're building this kind of web application that doesn't require storage of data in the database, then there's no need for the backend, because an example would be a brochure website, because a brochure website is just for relaying information. There's no particular type of data that is can be stored on the database. So with that kind of website, then there's no need for the backend. A special case would be probably if you want to store this information on the database, then that's so that you have one point of at all you want to change the data or the information on the website, then you're able to change it directly on the database without having to work on or look at the code that is relaying this information on the front end. So that's just a footnote, but it's important also to learn how everything works behind the scenes, how data is fetched from the database and how it's converted into a more presentable form on the front end. So yeah, that's it. That's the brief intro to the backend development. So as you'll be building your web project, so there are three major things you need to establish, and that is the logic, the database management, and the infrastructure. So the logic is just how your website will respond to given certain requests, or how the components on your website will interact. So there's no particular one way of coming up with the logic for a web application. This is all dependent on the programmer, how you want to relay these requests and how you want the website to receive these requests and give feedback or the results or the information, relay that information on the front end to the user. That is all up to the developer. The next one, the database management, is just how you will organize, manage, and retrieve your data. We looked at some of the languages, the database languages, and the most common one is the SQL, that's structured query language. And this just helps you fetch, manage, and retrieve your data. So depending on the kind of database language you're using, then the backend developer need to be conversant with how data is managed on the database. And then lastly is the infrastructure. By infrastructure, I just mean how you're going to host your website, because you also need to take that into consideration when you are when you're developing or when you're working on your backend. You need to consider how this data is going to be hosted, because if I'm working on a database, a MongoDB is a kind of database. If I'm working with MongoDB, then probably I also need to consider the hosting should be able to support this kind of database. Or when I'm working with PHP as my backend programming language, then I also need to consider the hosting to be able to support this language, this PHP and its modules. So infrastructure of the hosting is also a consideration when you're working with the backend. And just down here, I've listed some of the languages used when working with the backend. And the most common one here is the PHP, because I can say over 60% of the websites, online websites, uses PHP. And it's one of the most commonly used languages for the backend, for relaying, getting that information from the front end to the backend, and also back. So another one is the Node.js. Node.js is just a framework for JavaScript. It's normally used with another backend language called Express, and they are most commonly used together for backend when you're working with JavaScript. Then also we have Python. Python is also used for backend, and with Python, you're able to use there are also Python frameworks. The front end, we looked at JavaScript frameworks, and even the back end, these languages also have their own frameworks. And I think the learning path is just the same. You need to learn the language before the framework, so that once you're conversant with all the syntax of the language, then working with the framework will be a lot easier. Others, we have Ruby, we have Java, and the last one here is the C#. So these are just some of the backend languages that you need to know for you to be a backend developer. So the choice is also up to you. If you'll be working with PHP, then if the front end is the basic HTML, CSS, and JavaScript, the most common PHP is most commonly used together with those for you to have sort of like a full stack. The Node.js is used also a commonly used backend framework, and it's mostly used with the JavaScript front-end frameworks. They're used together, as we'll look at later on. Then we also have Python, Ruby, Java, and the C#. So the next terminology I want to introduce to you on backend development is the API. So the API stands for Application Programming Interface, and this is just what allows two applications to communicate to each other. And we gave an example of the front end and the back end. When you develop your front end using HTML, CSS, and JS, and then you have a form, the user wants to submit a form, then it's the API that you're going to develop is what is going to manage this communication from the front end to the server to the database, so that information flows through each node in a more easy and simpler way. So that is we use the APIs for that communication between the front end, the server, and probably the database. So I've given here an example when you are using a mobile phone and the application connects to the internet and sends data to the server. And when the server retrieves this data, interprets it and performs the necessary action, and then send the results back to your phone. And that is sort of kind of the similar situation we have here, the work of an API, sort of to enable sending and receiving of requests between different kinds of nodes. It could be a server, it could be a database. And that is the work of the API. And most APIs nowadays, because there's need for standards, most APIs nowadays, I've put down there as a footnote that they adhere to two kinds of standards. We have the HTTP and the REST. We have the HTTP and the REST API. And both of them, I think, are developer friendly. It's easier to get conversant with how these kinds of API standards work. They are both common, so I'd advise, if you are able to learn both or to know how to develop API or using both HTTP and the REST. I think the next terminology also I want to mention, we've mentioned it severally, is the databases. And database is just where you store your information on your server for the web applications. And there are so many different kinds of databases, but the most commonly used one is the relational database. And the term comes from the way data is stored, that is in a table-like format, sort of how we normally store data in the Excel sheet. relational database uses the same kind of format, so that within the tables you store your data in terms of rows and columns. And this is what we refer to as structured query languages. These are the languages that are used to store data in this kind of format. And the most common ones are the MySQL server, the Oracle, the MySQL, and the PostgreSQL. And the next one is the NoSQL. NoSQL means it's just non-relational. This includes any database that is not structured or doesn't use SQL as its primary access language. So if you don't want to use relational databases, there's an option for using structured, not structured, but to store your data in an unstructured or semi-structured format. And the most common example is the Mongodb. And third kind of database that I think is worth mentioning is the cloud database. And just from the name cloud, it means that these databases are designed to be used on the cloud, sort of to offer availability, to make it flexible, and to make it scalable. And the most common example is Microsoft Azure and the Amazon RDS. Other kinds of database could be hierarchical, where data is stored in a hierarchical format. We have the key value databases, where each kind of data is assigned a particular key for referencing. And then also we have the document databases, which the common example is the JSON kind of format. Then we also have the graph databases, among the rest. So these are the three major kinds of databases, and there are several others. So it's up to you to pick one or two that you want to learn. And I've given you how they are used with the different kinds of backend languages. The MySQL is mostly used with the PHP, Python, Java, Kotlin. I think it's also used with JavaScript. MySQL is the most common type of database that is used, and it's used with most of these backend languages, and it's also easier to learn given the kind of data structure that it has. The next one is Mongodb. Mongodb is mostly used with the JavaScript frameworks, and it can also be used with other languages like the PHP, the Python, C# and Java. PostgreSQL is used mostly when you are handling an application that works with data. That's why you can see it's mostly used with Python and Perl. Firebase is used mostly with mobile applications, because also the DB is online, and when you're developing applications using probably Java, Kotlin, even Flutter, JavaScript and Python, then you're able to use Firebase as your database. And then Microsoft SQL Server is just used with the Microsoft applications, and C# is the language for most Microsoft applications. And then another thing that is worth mentioning is the content management system. So probably there are those who think maybe they are not, those who don't want to learn these advanced programming languages, but still you have the interest of developing websites. And there are tools we call the CMS, content management systems. And these are just used to manage web content and allow sort of different contributors to contribute or edit or publish this content. So the most common type of CMS is WordPress, and these CMS they are mostly used for freelancing work or for small website projects, those kinds of projects that probably are on a budget. And if you don't want to go through that long that long learning curve to know those different kinds of languages, then you can learn how to work with these kinds of CMS. Though they also still need you to know the basics of the front-end development, but it helps you build websites a bit faster and quicker, and that's why they are mostly used with projects on a budget, or when you want to do freelancing for websites, then you're able to learn this one. I've mentioned here the main advantage for using this CMS is it enables those who are not technically minded to create functional pages or upload and modify content themselves. And one thing I've learned with the CMS is that probably you get a client who want to manage the content on their own, so that they do not always have to depend on a techie person to manage this content for them. Then it's advisable to use the content management system for when you're developing their website, so that the development will be faster and it's easier for them to learn how to manage their own content. Most of these CMS are built on the HTML, CSS, JS, and PHP. And the most common one I use is WordPress, but there are others like Joomla, we have the Drupal, Magento for e-commerce. There's also Wix, which I think most of you know. And so when you're working with these CMSs, you are still able to build visually appealing websites a bit quicker and a bit faster, because they offer you, you're able to use different kinds of plugins to add the kind of functionality you want. And also you're able to sort of use an already existing template like a theme, and then to build on that, making your work or development of your website a bit faster. So I just thought one worth mentioning that for those who don't want to dive deep into the technical bit of programming, then you're able to use these kinds of CMS to develop your website. Now there's also a terminology referred to as the headless CMS. So for the normal CMS, we have two kinds of layers. We have the front end, or the template layer, and then we have the back end where data is now managed, where you manage your data. So the headless CMS is just a CMS without the template part. You only have the part where data is managed, the backend content management system, where you are able to store your data without having to present them on the front end. So headless CMS, they're mostly used with APIs to deliver content to another web application. Like if you're building an application on React, and probably you want to store your blog on a database, you're able to use the headless CMS together with the APIs to sort of fetch these blogs and present them on your React application. And the advantages of using headless CMS is that probably if you develop a mobile app, then you're able to use the same API to get this content from the back end of this CMS to your app. So it's able to work with different kinds of applications, whether a mobile app, whether it's a web application, whether it's a desktop app, so that you only have one source of information, one source of truth for all your content and assets. You have one place of managing and updating your content. So that's the advantage of using headless CMS with other web application. And the most commonly used headless CMS is we have the Strapi. Strapi is open source and it's quite easy to learn because of it has, you are able to use the interface to develop your code. So as you manipulate the interface, your code is also generated. So that's what I also use. I use Strapi for as my headless CMS. Another one you could use is probably Ghost and the Netlify CMS. Netlify is a different kind of CMS because it's a single page application that is written in React. So it's a script that is running on a static page but resides on your repository. So you are able to sort of use it to call your data from that online repository. And it's built for mostly static site generators. Yeah. And then we have also Webini. Webini is also a developer-friendly CMS. It's powered by Node, React, and what's the name? And GraphQL API. GraphQL is also used for API calls. I think probably we'll look at it later. And the last thing, not the last, but the next thing that I'd want to talk about is deployment. And deployment simply means once you've developed your application, it needs to be pushed, it needs to be made accessible online. And that is what the deployment is all about. Because after you've developed your application, you need to know how to make it live on the internet. And that is what deployment is all about. That these three terms that I'd like to define to you. We have the domain. Normally have the domain, the hosting, and probably the SSL, the secure socket layer. So the domains just simply gives you a name for your website. Like if probably you're building an application for MediaForce, then probably the domain will be mediaforce.com or mediaforce.co.ke. That's now the domain name. And the domain just helps users easily access your website. It helps user access the content on your website. So when the user types the domain on the URL, then they're able to get your website. So normally you have to register a domain with the domain registrar or a hosting company. And the prices for the domain depends on the kind of domain you want, whether .org or .com or .ke or Kenya. And then hosting also depends on the type of storage that you are given, the kind of features, the server features that you are given. That is also dependent on the company. So you also need to look for a reliable hosting so that depending on the features they're offering to you, you are able to make your judgment based on that. And then the SSL is just what ensures security when somebody is accessing the website. Like when you have an e-commerce website where payment is made online, then there's need to make that website secure for that kind of transaction. And that's the duty of the SSL, to provide an encryption between the client and the server. And down here, I've just mentioned the kinds of deployment. It could be through Git. We looked at Git, the online repository, or it could be the FTP, file transfer protocol, or the SFTP, or the secure shell. So these are ways in which you are able to deploy your web application. If you are deploying to like a serverless CMS, like if you're deploying to a serverless CMS, like what's the name, Webini, then you are able to use the Git, because data is stored on the Git, and then from there you are able to make it accessible through your domain. FTP is just through file transfer. It will be uploading the files to your hosting, and secure shell, it is through the terminal. If you want to deploy through the terminal, then you use secure shell. And as we conclude this video, and I want to mention some of the things we mentioned earlier, and that is the full stack development. So full stack means you are conversant with both the front end and the back end tools together with the databases. So the role of the full stack developer is to develop applications from start to finish, from the front end until you complete everything on the back end and the databases. And by stack simply means different kinds of technologies that handle different kinds of functionality on the same website. And you could say an example of a stack that I've given here is the man stack. The man stack simply means you're using MongoDB as your database, you're using Express and Node as your backend, and React as your frontend. So that's a full stack web development. So some of the programming languages or frameworks that are used in full stack development are the PHP frameworks like Laravel, where you have both the front end and the back end in one place. And now you're able to use the back end PHP as your back end, and then the front end, the HTML, with the option of using the frameworks, the React and other frameworks as your front end. Others could be CodeIgniter and Symfony. So here also, it's up to you to choose which one you feel it will be easier for you to learn, or which one, depending on the kind of skill that is required of you. Then Python, we have the Flask and Django. Those are the two most commonly used full stack frameworks for Python. And then also the CherryPy. JavaScript, we have the man stack and the min stack. The only difference is with the R and the A. The R is for React and the A is for Angular. So you can switch also the front end depending on which kind of JavaScript or framework that you learned. Then the C#, we just have the ASP.NET, which is an MVC framework. Probably in the next video also we are going to look at these kinds of architectures. Here the C#, the ASP.NET uses the MVC, which is the most common approach or logic that is used when developing such kind of applications. And next, also I'd like to mention something about mobile app development, because as you continue to grow in web, probably you'll learn some technologies that are also used in mobile app development. And the examples I've given here are used for developing progressive web apps, which are just applications that have been built using web technologies. Like we have the React Native. When you learn React, then it will be quite easy for you to learn also React Native to build now applications that look more native, so built using a web technology. Another one could be Flutter. Flutter is also another kind of technology used for web application. It is built on a programming language called Dart, and Flutter is the main, I can say, framework for Flutter is it is based on what do you call it? It's based on widgets, because you build widget upon widget upon widget, and with that you are able to design and lay out the components of your web application. The good thing about it is that you're able to build very visually appealing mobile apps with more native look and feel. And and I think also it's quite easy. It's not that hard to learn. It's easy to learn Flutter, though for you to be conversant with Flutter, you need to know the Dart programming language. Another one is Ionic. Ionic, I'd advise you to learn Ionic when you're working with Angular. Once you've learned Angular, then it will be quite easier to learn Ionic. Ionic is also used to build progressive web applications, where you're able to build a web application and at the same time you're able to build a mobile application using the same kind of technology. The advantages of these technologies is that you're able to build applications both for Android and iOS, both using the same code base. You don't have to write separate code base for Android and for iOS. You just build it using one code base, and you're able to deploy for the different kinds of apps. Yeah, I think as we conclude, I'll just like to give you some of the resources that I personally used to learn programming. And just to mention, it's not like I'm advertising them, but for me, they worked quite good for me while I was learning. And the first one is the Pre-Code Camp, where you can get a vast or numerous resources, free resources for programming, could be data science, could be game development, and many more. And then the next one is Traverse Media. That's also where I learned how to use React mostly. So if you're looking for a place where you can get a crash course for a particular language that you want to learn, then you're able to look up Traverse Media. And then thirdly, we have the Academy Mind. And this is where I also learned JavaScript. You're able to get numerous tutorials about JavaScript on that platform. Then we have the Net Ninja, where you have short videos where you're able to learn any kind of technology you want to learn. You're able to get so many resources there. And lastly, there's the Coding Cafe, where if you want to learn using real-life projects, then you are able to look up the Coding Cafe. And lastly, now that you've known these kinds of technologies, then what next? So first, we mentioned the path for the front end, the kind of path that you need to take if you want to learn front end. So now that we've mentioned all these kinds of technologies, then first you need to develop your own plan on how you want to learn or how you're going to learn these technologies. And I gave you at least a good direction on the path to take or how you're going to go from being a beginner to a more advanced stage of your role. The next thing is you need to learn the fundamentals. And I mentioned the HTML, CSS, and JS. For any kind of web development, these are the fundamental languages that you need to learn and you need to be conversant with. And they go hand in hand with the HTTP and the DOM. And so once you've learned this, then you can say you are now a front-end developer. You are able to build any kind of front-end application with those three as the basis of any web application. And then another third thing probably I would advise is don't try to learn everything all at once, but you need to, once you've set one clear path or guideline, then you need to follow through that path from beginner as you learn HTML, CSS as you go into more advanced stuff. So don't try to learn everything at once. Just be patient with yourself, and yeah, just keep it a day at a time. Make sure you learn something new, and as you continue to grow from the basic elements or the basic languages, as you go into more advanced terminologies and functionalities and frameworks, we just keep on learning. And then probably a fourth option will be to go for one of these online courses. There are so many numerous online courses right now where you're able to learn, and you're able to also get instructors to guide you through as you continue to learn these languages. And then the fifth one is to try, and as you continue to learn these languages, it's good to put them into good use or into practice by developing some of the real life projects. You are able to use these real life projects sort of to help you understand how probably you would approach a given project, or how you will help you to assess your skills in a particular language that you are learning. And so with these real life projects, you are able to know how your style of programming or your style of development, develop your own kind of style, how you're going to approach the project, and how you're going to come up with that product. And then lastly, once you've learned, then a good place to start is to apply for jobs or look for clients through some of the freelancing, most of these freelancing websites, so that will also help you develop a good portfolio for your resume. So once you go for these freelancing jobs, then again, there it's a good place to put what you've practiced and all that you've learned put them into practice. And yeah, that's it for this video. And I would like to thank you for those of you who joined us, and for those who will be watching this later also, thank you that you've made it to the end of this video. And I hope that I've given you, or I've made you understand some of the key tools and programming languages that are already there in the market, and what you need to learn and how you need to approach it. So I'm hoping that you are able to I've given you a clear layout and path for you to take, and I've given you a clear guideline on how to approach any kind of programming that you'd want to learn. And yeah, hopefully you stay tuned. Don't forget to press that subscribe button, because just as I mentioned earlier, all that we have looked at, from the front end to the tools to the back end, the databases, we are going to come up with videos for each section. So we are going to go through them one by one to help you understand also what you need to know in those given languages. And hopefully also we'll be able to come up with courses for you to take to help you also learn on your own. Thank you very much for joining me for this session. It was a great honor to have you for this segment, and I look forward to interacting with you in our next video. I'm Ansel Mushura, and you